Our galaxy is a huge enigma. It is hard to deny. And although scientists work day and night to solve the mysteries of the unknown, there is still a lot that remains a puzzle. I bet even if you're not into astrology, you probably know your sign. Is it a Scorpio, Libra, Leo, or any other of 12? Well, I'm a Taurus, for example, and I've always been mesmerized by stars and planets. Let's be truthful. We've all been guilty of reading horoscopes in the back pages of magazines or newspapers at least once in our lifetime, don't we? I know it happens mainly out of either boredom or curiosity to see if the information could relate to us in some way or another. And I don't blame you. In a stressful, data-driven era like today, many of us seek comfort and try to collect some insight out of pretty much everything, including the Zodiac, even if we don't particularly believe in it. But what if? When it comes to astrology, I am not entirely sure what it is, how it works, or even if it works at all, but I must admit that the topic fascinates me greatly. So I found a person who knows about this subject way more than I do. This is Natalie Holbrook. She is my astrologer for today. Natalie specializes in a soul-purpose astrology, and she believes that each one of us was born with exceptional gifts to share and offer to the world. But also, she is very mindful and talented herself, which is a great combo. What brought you to the astrology?
I've always been into it. Since I was little, I was like, oh, let me see what my Taurus horoscope is. And like you had said too, a lot of things never really resonated with me. Like I was like, yes, there's pieces where I like to be indulgent, I like to eat chocolate, I like to take bubble baths, I like to shop, but a lot of the other stuff I didn't really resonate that with much. And then I was in Bali 6 years ago and I had my first astrology chart reading. And it was this guy, and I remember he was like, you are actually very Gemini, and you also have a lot of Leo. And when he told me that, I was like, oh my gosh. And it was really mind-blowing. And it really explained and solidified so many things about myself that I was just like, okay, I need to go into this deeper. And then it actually wasn't even until about a year ago that I had listened to a podcast with an astrologer. And she was talking about how we all have different planets in different signs. And I ordered this astrology report, one that you can just like download instantly. And it gives you like an automated little paragraph of where your chart is and everything. And all of a sudden I was hooked. And I remember I had this road trip that I had to take, and I just started listening on YouTube to all of these different videos about like, if you have Venus in Gemini, if you have, Saturn in Sagittarius, what this means. And I was suddenly like, this, 8 hours of listening that I've had is better than any therapy session I've ever had. Like everything just clicked. And so suddenly I was like, I have to help other people with this the way that I've been helped as well.
What kind of astrology do you use for work?
So there's not necessarily like one type of name. I would say that I'm a Western astrologer. And kind of the differences within Western astrology and then any other types is that obviously there's like Chinese astrology, there's something called Vedic astrology, which is what Indians use, or that's the Indian form. The biggest difference is just the placement of like what we believe of when things are happening and how they're happening. And what I personally do though is that I do something called soul purpose astrology. And because I feel like, especially right now, especially for our generation, a lot of people who really are in their 20s, right, is that there's this whole thing of like, what is my purpose? Who am I? And we're at, fortunately, we're at this beautiful place in life where we have the option to really dive in and discover ourselves. And astrology is a really magnificent tool to allow us to do that and to see that on this like greater divine plan that is so much bigger than our little tiny brains could ever imagine.
In order to become an astrologer, is it important to be from a family with some sort of astrology background where the knowledge has been passed from generations to generations, or anyone can pick up this skill anytime?
Yeah, absolutely not. I don't come from a family of astrology whatsoever. I come from a family of doctors. So that's a family of science, right? Like my grandpa was a neurosurgeon and my other grandpa worked in oil. So there was none of that. My dad and my mom, neither. So you don't at all, and it's more of kind of like, what is your soul telling you? And you can really pick it up at any age and at any point in your life too. Like I was not born with this or anything, I think I always had the interest in the esoteric, but it didn't really come to me until I was 33.
And you also mentioned that it's on your natal chart that you kind of supposed to have this talent in your life to be an astrologer. So that helps definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's little clues in my own birth chart that are like, you could do this.
So modern astrology is placed under the Western astrology, as we talked about already, whereas the East is referred to as a Vedic or Indian astrology. Another one is branched out as a Chinese astrology, and there's also Druid astrology. There are so many. So how do I know which one is right for me?
Good question. So, here's the thing, like, I think that every single aspect of astrology has truth to it. The difference with Chinese astrology is they kind of use a different system where it's like year of the tiger, year of the rat. And I'll sometimes look at Chinese astrology just because I think it's fascinating, but it's not what I know how to read. And if I really wanted to get into it, I probably could, you could, anybody could, and it could resonate. And, same thing with Vedic. What Vedic does is it actually would make you and I, since we're both Leo rising, it would make us Cancer risings. And so it pushes the year back a little bit. And so it's just like, if you resonate with that, it might, because, we have emotions and maybe we're maternal, things like that. But it's really of just like whatever resonates with you the most is kind of what you can go with. And to also not judge of like, this is the only right thing. It's more of just like what feels right for that person.
And another question that I'm sure bothers a lot of people, can the astrologer predict the future?
That's a tricky one. I don't think that we can ever predict the future, no. I don't think that we can predict and say, this is going to happen on this day. Because no matter what, there's like 50% of what the stars are saying, right? And 50% of our own free will. Like, we have the decision. Like, I could have the energy to, go and make a lot of money today, but I could also get caught up in a Netflix series and be like, I'm going to stay here instead. So it's all about like what we're going to choose to do. But what we can predict is what type of energy you do have available for you. And it's really about if you're going to tap in and do that thing, if you're going to go for it, or if you're going to allow yourself to spiral or up level. It's kind of up to that person at the time.
If I try to explain it to you, I would say it is almost like a therapy session where you get to see the inside of your psychological portrait and discuss with the therapist all your strengths and weaknesses. But then the therapist, who's actually an astrologer, would explain to you exactly why you are who you are and the reasons why you do this or that. And it would be like a huge puzzle came together at once, but you knew it already. So you get this comforting validation you needed all these years. And it would be so hard to disagree with because, well, it seems like the stars don't lie. Can we say that each natal chart is kind of a blueprint of our lives? And what exactly the natal astrology can tell us about?
Yeah, so the natal chart, also known as the birth chart, is this beautiful imprint of the moment that you took your first breath. It's as if there was a photographer standing outside of the hospital or the home or wherever it is that you were born, right? And as if a photographer took a photo of that moment and captured where every single planet was in the sky, what sign was ruling over all of the houses. And that's really what determines so much of who we are. And I know it sounds really crazy, right? Like, how could the stars be telling us this? But if we think about the things that the stars told the other things in life and why people follow them, it kind of does make sense that, of course, we're made from the same elements as stardust, as a lot of these other planets. Like, we're all made from carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen, all of these different things to get all scientific, right? But it does make sense that this would have an effect on how our personalities are. And also like the elements, how much fire do we have in us? How much water and earth and air? And all of those things really play into our whole mental system. And it's not even just astrology, you know, a lot of other ancient cultures, they use the 4 elements as these kind of like foundational blueprints of this really makes up your physical body, your emotional, your spiritual body too. You know, it's really empowering also. Like, I know that before I had my chart read, I always had these dreams of like writing children's books, which is something like an idea I want to do later, right? But then I found out that I have these 2 aspects, which means that 2 planets where they are in the sky are at a specific degree, which is a very positive degree. In astrology, we call it that they're aspected or they're talking to each other. And in that sense, it gives me this confidence of like, oh, I actually have this thing that like, if I wanted to do this, I could do it. And so once we learn those things, it's like, yes, like it's almost like you have this little cheerleader in the back of your head who's like, you have this energy and this vibration to do it, so go for it. And we can allow ourselves to really be more confident and empowered and encouraged because of the stars.
So basically, this is your intuition told you that you might be very good at it.
Yeah.
But you didn't believe in it.
Yeah.
You didn't listen to your intuition. You didn't listen to your gut feeling.
Right.
But then at some point you looked at your natal chart and it just confirms whatever intuition we're telling you.
Absolutely. And that's like so spot on because we all have intuition and we all have these dreams, you know, especially as kids. And then we go into this world that's like, you have to work a 9 to 5, or you should do this, or, you know, you should be married by 28 and have kids by 35, and then, you know, yada, 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 and it continues on. And we kind of can lose sight of a lot of those dreams, or we can have just other things get in the way of holding us back. And once you see your astro chart or your natal chart, then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, this is why I had that dream. And it really validates us, and it's almost kind of like being seen in this way that's like so much deeper than the way that any human could even see you. It's like, oh, this is like God or the universe seeing me and saying, yeah, like go do that.
You know, that reconfirmation of your intuitive feeling, that's actually very healthy.
Yes.
And that's what proves that natal chart or astrology is very healthy as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I mean, it's been around for so long. It's not like all of a sudden in the 70s, this was a part of like the peace and love movement, you know. It's like astrology is 5,000 plus years old. And why would every single culture, Chinese, Indian, Egyptian, Babylonian, like every single culture has their own form of astrology. So it's kind of like, clearly there's something real to all of this.
Right.
First astrology works were found during paleontological digs. That's when we found out that the Mesopotamians were predicting a good crop by reading the night sky. It was around 3000 BC. Just imagine. Ever since, the astrology, not to be confused with the astronomy, was more like an ancient belief that the sun, the moon, the stars, planets, and other celestial objects somehow influence on all Earth and human processes.
Can you help me to break down probably the most difficult but also the most logical question? What the astrology is really for?
Definitely the hardest question, yes. Okay, so what is it for? If we think about astrology in general, it's like people really just know the sun, and that's like their birthday. But it goes so much deeper than that. If we think about the whole chart, like when we are reading your chart, that's where we know that there's 3 main parts. And the 3 main parts are the actual astrological sign, the planets, and then the houses. And the sign is going to rule over each house. The house represents an area of our lives, and the planet is kind of like the star. It's kind of like the actor. It's like, well, that's going to either be our feelings, or it's going to be our ego, or it's going to be our creative blocks, or whatever it is. And so we take all of those 3 combinations, and it's from there that we can really learn how to read, well, why is it that I am the way that I am? Astrology is this really beautiful tool to just understand ourselves as human. And part of why this is so real is because there's patterns. You know, it's like something that might have happened 5,000 years ago. If we have that same astrological alignment, it might repeat itself, right? And hopefully the next time that we repeat it, we learn as evolved humans and conscious souls to do it in a different way. Or maybe we have the same type of thing, but we've already learned a lesson.
No secret, I'm extremely interested in the influence of astrology to the personal well-being and how it can be beneficial to some individuals on their path of becoming the healthier and happier human beings. Would you say that the astrology actually can help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So much. It's like we look at astrology as a reason for understanding ourselves, or a way to understand ourselves. And once we understand ourselves, we can give ourselves permission to do certain things. That's why there's a lot of, people or events that happen in our lives that we can take as these really hard things, and we live in that, or we live in comparison. And so once you just know yourself, if you think about every old temple in the world, right when you walk in on the top of it, they usually will all say, like, know thyself. And know thyself is like the deepest way that you can actually live a good life. Because if you say, okay, I know that this is my need, I know that this is my want, I know that these are my gifts, these are my challenges, these are my potential patterns, then we can really understand, oh, this is why I thought like this. This is why I have this crazy idea in my head all the time, or this is why I can't sleep at night. And it helps us to just reel it in and be like, it's okay, I have a validation. It gives us an answer to a question. I think that's what we're all kind of looking for, is like we're always seeking. And a lot of times we can seek for things that are outside of ourselves, or a certain type of relationship, or, chasing money or status or something along those lines. It doesn't mean that chasing money or status or a relationship is bad, but it's like, are you doing it in the way that's right for you? And astrology can help you to find what is right for you. I always think it's good to have like a reading, or to understand yourself and do something like twice a year. Maybe have a reading twice a year, follow up on different things that are happening in the planets, maybe take a few courses just to learn. And then that way you'll be able to kind of always have this knowledge of, okay, this is happening in the world right now. It's not just me, and you feel really comforted and secured by that. And, most diseases, and when we're in dis-ease, right, manifest in our body because of stress. And the more that we can somehow calm our minds and de-stress in that way, then we can be healthy overall. And astrology is an amazing tool to help us de-stress.
How did astrology become a part of wellness? And basically, what's your take on it?
I think that, if we look at what the word wellness means, it's about taking care of yourself, right? It's about being well. And there's well in the sense of like, yes, I'm drinking my smoothies, or I'm like eating lots of kale and arugula or whatever, like greens every day. But it's like, is your mind well? And that's really the deepest part about astrology, is that it can help our mind be well. And just by knowing yourself, and by knowing like, this is why I am this way, it can just give us that validation, and it really can play into keeping us sane. It's like the definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But once we know our chart, then we're like, okay, this is why. And it can actually motivate us to do something different, because then it's almost like we have that support. It's kind of like having a parent all of a sudden be like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. And it helps us to actually reparent ourselves in, okay, here's my blueprint. Let me go off of this. It gives us like this almost like set of instructions,
Clues.
Yeah,
if
it
you can
really
read
does.
them correctly.
Yeah, it's like no one was, we didn't get a guidebook when we were born of like, here's how to do life. But the astrology chart kind of is like that. And yeah, like with my guide, which is called The Treasure Map to Your Soul, so that you can learn how to read it and understand these things that really do lead you into this like ultimate level of wellness and well-being that most people don't even like think is possible.
According to the study conducted by Pew Research in 2017, more than 29% of Americans believe in astrology, and that number is growing. Interesting enough that the person's religious background didn't stop their belief in astrology either. Nearly 26% of American Christians believe in both astrology and God. Catholic numbers were slightly higher.
Some of your colleagues may say that the astrology is a science, but then there are skeptics who not really agree with that. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion? Is it science, or what is that?
I think it's totally science, absolutely. Because if we think about the stars, and stars are a science, right? Like astronomy is a science. And astrology comes from astronomy. And to be honest, astrology probably came before astronomy, because it's been going on for years and years. Mm-hmm. And if we think about, the way that the Egyptians used astrology and the farmers use the seasons of the moon, it's kind of like all of these people use the planets for these deep reasons. And they would always know too, like, okay, when the moon is full is when we're going to have a higher tide. Or even in the police stations now, they know, and at the hospitals, when it's a full moon, there's actually more people admitted to the hospital.
Right.
Because it brings bigger emotions out in people. So there's little clues like that we can kind of track. And yes, there hasn't been like a scientific study, but I actually think that would be a great idea to have a scientific study to prove this. Because, I think that why there's a lot of skeptics is because it's feeling, and it's people resonating, and it's a lot of intuition. But then once you sit down, and I would love to read like certain scientists' chart who don't believe it, because like without a doubt we would be able to pinpoint and be like, here's even why you don't believe in it. Because there's some type of level that has that skepticism or that criticalness or like that like stuck, right, in their certain way. And so it really is, it's a science, but it also has this magic to it. And so I think that that's where, people can kind of put it into the magic category because we've become obsessed with science.
True.
But once we can fuse them together, then, possibilities of well-being and just of like your own abundance are really endless.
What planets and houses would be responsible for skepticism?
Probably Capricorn would be one, because Capricorn is all about systems and structure and government, and it wants to do things in a certain way. Like it's very orderly, it's very systematic, and all earth signs can have a bit of skepticism to them because they want things to be done in their way, Like it's like, well, where's the material? Where is the evidence that we're looking at? And so with the astrology, it's like, well, it's in the sky and we're feeling it. And Capricorn and all Earth is really like, I need to know the details and the answers and the numbers. And so that would definitely be one. There's some parts of air that also might be very skeptical about it, because air is about thinking and stimulating, and it's very much like spacey, and it always wants to like find. But we can shift the air into like, well, let's be curious about this, and let's dig and find, but not be skeptical. So those can kind of both be that way, because science falls under the air category as well. So a lot of like our most amazing scientists were a lot of air type people, which is Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini.
I'm guessing that you might have come across of many people in your life who doubt what you do for a living. What would you say to those people who are skeptics?
I always ask them why they're skeptical, and a lot of it comes from fear, to be honest. And because some people have had experiences where they've actually had things that were true and that really freaked them out.
Right.
Yeah. And so to them, they were like, oh, it's evil. Or it's like of the devil. Like there's been some people that I know who won't even give me their birth info because they're very much into a certain religion, let's say. And so they think that anything else is going to be very wrong. When to me, I'm like, well, that's kind of silly because, let's just see. And so a lot of it just comes from fear or just from being very stuck in a different way. And I think that also that astrology kind of got a bad reputation when it was so much about the horoscopes. And then people didn't resonate. And so then they just throw it away of like, oh, this isn't real. But then once you do go deeper and you go into the whole thing, then you can see like, oh yeah, this actually really does resonate with me and I see its value.
This seems easy to get carried away with the astrology. Some people become delusional and start finding signs where there aren't any. And as a result, they forget that they have to actually move themselves forward in order to achieve something, in order to do something. How would you address to those who are obsessed with astrology? And isn't it has to be really healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is there's always like moderation with everything, but you have to know that, yes, the stars say that there's one thing and that you are this certain way, but we have to remember that that's just one piece. You have to look at the whole chart. You have to look at every single planet, every single point, and then all of the aspects. And to also say, am I going to allow this to rule me? Or can I also go and do my own thing? You know, it's kind of like we use that as the energy that it brings us and as a really good like starting line. And then we say, okay, and then it's like my springboard that I go from there. Because you still have to live your own life. And you know, there's a lot of those apps out there. I don't recommend using the apps that tell you your daily horoscope at all. Because I think that what that does is it puts into our minds this idea of what's going to happen. And most human minds go to the negative first, you know? So if it says there's going to be something explosive in your relationship, we're going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to break up. But it's like, what if you get pregnant? Or what if it's like something explosive that's cool and different, you know? So there's that whole aspect of just like allowing life to flow and not getting so attached. But whenever we get so addicted to something and allowing it to rule our minds, then we know it's probably not healthy.
That's true. So just, if you want to do your own research about the astrology, just go to real astrologists.
Yes.
The very good one, and then decide for yourself. I believe that astrology is an interesting instrument, especially when it comes to finding inspiration and learning something new about ourselves. It certainly gives us tools to use during both minor and major self-explorations. I also believe that astrology doesn't need to be sold to non-believers. Whether you choose to believe or you don't is entirely up to you. But remember, there is always a chance that if you try, it may work for you too.